everyone, and welcome to our lesson on watercolor painting and technique. Pretty excited that we're finally here. I absolutely love working with watercolor. It takes a little bit of practice and getting used to, but once you have a handle on it, I promise you, you're gonna love it. So for today, what I want you to do is we're going to be practicing some techniques. So this is just us getting used to the medium, playing around with it, figuring out different things, different techniques that we can use for our final project. Now, what you'll notice, or what I would like you to do, is go into your art kit. I want you to take out that piece of paper, that thick watercolor piece of paper that's in there. I gave you one thick sheet. I want you to take that out and I want you to cut it in half. And we're only going to be working with that one half, okay? So once you have yourself all set up with your piece of paper, you're going to take out your watercolor palettes, okay, that we all have. Your paintbrush that I have given you, you're going to set yourself up on that piece of paper, on that watercolor sheet, and you're going to give yourself 4 sections. Okay, it's going to look like this. I made mine a bit bigger just so that you can see it. So you're going to make 4 squares, and then we're just going to play around, okay? So these are actually some old techniques that I've used, and I'll show you those later on. So what I'm going to do, first things first, like I said, the watercolor paper, you'll notice, is very thick. It's very porous, and that is for the obvious reason that it's working with water, so it needs to be able to absorb the medium itself. So what you're going to do, first and foremost, is set yourself up with some clean water, some paper towel for drying and for dripping and things like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to open up the pores of the piece of paper. Okay, and we do that by taking our brush into a little bit of water. Paper towel is for all the dripping. And we're just going to very lightly open up the pores of our paper. You're not drenching it by any means, just very lightly. We're just going to open it up so that the paper absorbs the paint. Okay? Really quick. There. All done. So the first technique I'm going to show you, it's called blotting. Okay, so I'm going to pick a color, any color. I happen to really like blues and purples. So I'm going to pick them. Pick this color here. And I'm going to blot on my page. So kind of like flicking, if you will. Creates a really cool effect that I like, especially if you're trying to create a sky look or anything like that. Just blotting. And I'm going to clean my brush and grab another color. I'm going to grab red this time, dab it in, and I'm going to blot. Like I said, really cool effects for clouds and skies and stars and things like that. That's where you use blotting the most. Hopefully you guys can see that. That's blotting. Pretty straightforward. So for our next technique that I'm going to show you, it's called washing. Now with washing, we're going to start off. I use blue again. I'm going to start off darker and very lightly push the paint down until we wash it lighter and lighter. Think of it kind of like our grayscale, really. And just keep blending. Push the paint down until you get what's called a wash-like look. So you start off darker at the top and using a little bit of water. Again, you'll notice I'm not drenching it. I'm controlling my brush, controlling my medium, my paint, and I'm pushing my way down. And that is called the washing technique. Okay, give that a try. Next, I'm going to do what's called embossing. Now, you can actually purchase embossers at an art store. I personally think you don't have to. You can essentially use anything. So embossing is when you actually make an indentation in the paper. And when you put the paint over it, it looks darker. For example, I'm going to emboss or press using blunt-like object, if you will. I'm going to emboss a shape using a different color. I'm going to go over it and what you're going to notice after you work with it a bit more is that the paint gets stuck in the indentation and it stays darker, which is a cool little technique, a little trick. If you're ever working in a landscape and you're trying to create textures, this is a really cool trick. So you'll notice I've made a circle, or I embossed a circle. I put green over top, and as you can see, the green is starting to get darker in the areas that I went over because the paper is holding that shape. Pretty cool. Like I said, if I go over it a couple more times, it'll get darker and darker. And something to remember with water paint or watercolor too when you're working with it, when it dries, it actually looks a bit different. So it's a medium that you kind of have to wait and see as it dries how things turn out. And then if you want to go back and add to it, you always can, which is really, really cool. And the last thing I want to show you, it's called removal. Now with this, this is kind of how I make my clouds. When I am working with watercolor. So I've applied some paint, basic paint, and I dry it. I kind of dab it off my piece of paper, like that. Nothing fancy. And then what I do, because the paper is still kind of damp, I do what's called a removal method. I actually start scraping off a little bit. Actually, I made mine too dry. I'm going to wet it a bit more. I start scraping off my paint and a layer of the paper. And what ends up happening, I'll make it a bit darker so you guys can see this. You have the color around it, and as you scrape it off, there we go. And you get the white underneath and the color around it. It's a really cool way to make clouds. Or flowers, essentially anything that you kind of want to highlight in. So now that's white. Now if I were to go back and add more color, where I've removed it, it just gave me some texture around it. And if I keep working with it, it would look like a pretty cool sky. So I want you guys to play with these techniques. There's so many more techniques on the internet, on YouTube. Please feel free to explore, to play around with it. Some other ones I've done in the past, it's called salting, something really, really cool. If you YouTube it, you'll see it. There's my embossing, there's the removal. Another technique is called waxing. So if in areas of which you don't want paint to get on, you can put a little bit of wax, like from a candle or something, which is right here, and the green will not actually bleed over because there's wax on it. So it kind of keeps the painting a bit more tidy. So these are just some of the watercolor techniques that I want you guys to play around with. But if there's more you find, please feel free to work those. My expectation is a minimum of 4 that you play around with. Have fun with it. We'll chat soon.